Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Al24 News live from Algiers. Coming up next in our World News program. President Joe Biden repeated his call for his citizens to leave Ukraine immediately and reiterated that under no circumstances would he send troops to the field in Ukraine, even to evacuate Americans in the event of a Russian invasion of the country. Plus, the foreign ministers of the United States, Australia, Japan and India began discussions today, Friday, on deepening the so-called Quad alliance, which aims to contain the expansion of the Chinese influence in the Asia-Pacific region. Also coming up in our World News program, Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva tested positive late last year for a heart medication. And Libya's parliament appointed on Thursday former Interior Minister Fethi Bashaga to replace Abdelhamid Beba as head of government in a controversial vote, a challenge to interim Premier Abdelhamid Beba's administration. Thank you for joining us. In an exclusive interview with NBC News Channel, U.S. President Joe Biden repeated his call for his citizens to leave Ukraine immediately and reiterated that under no circumstances would he send troops to the field in Ukraine, even to evacuate Americans in the event of a Russian invasion of the country. Biden considered that it would be a world war when the Americans and the Russians start shooting at each other.
That's what I've asked is American citizens should leave now. We're dealing with one of the largest armies in the world. This is a very different situation and things could go crazy quickly. There's not. That's a world war. When Americans and Russians start shooting at one another, we're in a very different world than we've ever been.
From architects to bakers to dentists, ordinary Ukrainians are learning how to defend their country as best they can see the massive force of Russian troops positioned along the country's border move to invade. Ayedi Usama has more details.
As the world watches tensely to see if Russian troops massing on Ukraine's borders are preparing to mount a new invasion, Ukrainians are living high level of pressure, anxiety and panic over the threat that's coming as close as their borders. For the last 8 years, Ukraine has lived under a permanent state of alert, with the constant threat of Russian intervention in its territory. The fear and tension have led many civilians to seek military training to be prepared in the event of a conflict.
Our main task is to support army not in the front line but on the back and also to protect infrastructure, to support civilians.
On the outskirts of Kiev, groups of men and women receive military training for weeks. They are regular civilians who left their cozy homes and joined the territorial defense forces, a reserve corps set up by authorities to support the Ukrainian armed forces in the event of a conflict. They train on their own time and they buy their own weapons.
Came naturally. I just have to protect my family. Of course, I hope that this situation would de-escalate and I can continue my scientific work.
Many veteran soldiers and commandos have come back to the armed forces in hope of being handy in any type of training for the newcomers in the Ukrainian army.
I don't feel comfortable fighting the Russians. We're all Slavic, but we're on our own land and we have to defend it. We understand the situation. It's not nice to kill someone, but sometimes we have to. I feel responsible for these young people.
Civilians have been working together with reservists and others with military training, learning to handle a weapon, execute combat tactiques and maneuvers, and master other necessary skills. Although civilians are actively training for war, they will likely not be directing any kind of a militant response to a Russian invasion. Instead, they would augment existing Ukrainian forces and operate with the military.
On the other hand, Donetsk People's Republic considers Ukraine a terrorist state and will ask to recognize it as such on the international level, DPR head Denis Pushilin announced today, Friday. According to Pushilin, the republic counts on its own forces, its own servicemen, and is ready to do everything to achieve peace as soon as possible. German, Russian, Ukrainian and French representatives have agreed to meet again in March after difficult talks in Berlin. The meeting in the so-called four-way Normandy format late Thursday lasted for more than 9 hours. Participants from all four countries, however, remain committed to the 2015 Minsk peace agreement between Kiev and Moscow on the separatist conflict and will continue to work with vigor on implementing it.
We agreed that we had to overcome differences in our interpretations of the Minsk agreement. We haven't managed to overcome them.
The foreign ministers of the United States, Australia, Japan and India began discussions on Friday on deepening their so-called Quad alliance, which aims to contain the expansion of the Chinese influence in the Asia-Pacific region. The meeting is also a chance for the Quad nations to tackle other global issues, such as the ongoing pandemic situation and the Ukrainian crisis. Nabil Khazini has more details.
In Melbourne, top leaders of the Quad nations gathered to deepen cooperation to ensure the Indo-Pacific region was free from coercion. The foreign ministers of the United States, Australia, Japan and India began discussions on Friday on deepening their so-called Quad alliance.
And so we'll continue to ensure that our contributions are about stabilising the rules-based order, are about contributing to security and stability and prosperity. And that is one of the great values of the discussions that we have had today on every single subject.
US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who arrived to Australia this week, stressed the importance of alliances for tackling global and regional issues.
As Indo-Pacific countries, as democracies, as nations who understand how important it is to uphold the international rules that have provided the foundation for decades of shared security and prosperity, it's in our interest to do more together.
The Quad aims to contain the expansion of the Chinese influence in the region, as well as the mounting tensions between Russia and the West over the Ukraine crisis and the Afghanistan situation.
We've made every possible effort to engage Russia, to look at the concerns that it's raised, to share concerns that we have, that European partners and allies have, to see if we can't find ways to advance collective security on a reciprocal basis.
The pandemic is also on the Quad table. COVID-19 has allowed the group to take on a broader mission than containing Chinese power. The four countries use this framework to commit to distributing 1.3 billion vaccines, of which 500 million have already been delivered. Information technology issues, including the deployment of 5G telecommunications network and climate change, are also topics to be discussed in the meeting.
Libya's parliament appointed on Thursday former Interior Minister Fathi Bashagha to replace Abdelhamid Dbeiba as head of government in a controversial vote, a challenge to interim Premier Abdelhamid Dbeiba's administration. Mariam Zain reports.
The parliament voted to provide confidence to Fathi Bashagha as head of government. Parliamentary spokesperson Abdullah Blihik said after a session in the eastern city of Tobruk. Armed groups in Tripolitania support Fathi Bashagha and Abdelhamid Dbeiba, both from the west of the country. The two politicians in intense competition were both candidates in the next presidential election for December. In a televised statement on Tuesday, Abdelhamid Dbeiba emphasized that his interim government would only hand up power to an elected government.
I will accept no new transitional phase, and we will not step down from our role in the government that we promise to the people until an election is held. The unity of the government will proceed with its work until we hand over power to an elected government.
Parliament ratified a new modification to the Constitutional Declaration, which has served as the interim constitution since 2011, at the commencement of the session in Tobruk, with the goal of having some provisions changed by an ad hoc committee. Since Muammar Gaddafi's administration fell in 2011, Libya has been stuck in a political crisis marked by rivalries between the main regions, power conflicts, and foreign intervention. After years of violent conflict and divides between East and West, the Dbeibah administration was formed a year ago under UN auspices to oversee the transition to the elections that were eventually postponed due to security, legal and political issues. The move by the parliament is exposing the country to be ruled by two parallel governments once again, as it did in 2014 when the country was in the middle of a civil conflict.
The first big doping case at the Beijing Olympics involves one of its biggest stars. Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva tested positive late last year for a heart medication. The substance found in it is banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency because it can improve endurance and increase blood flow efficiency, both crucial to any high-end athletic performance. Valieva helped propel the ROC to win gold in the figure skating team competition. The medal ceremony has been delayed over the result of her drug test.
Clearly, in this specific case, it is an active case and we are waiting for it to be fully seen to the end, and it would be wrong of anyone to make any comment on this, actually, particularly because we are talking about a case of a minor, a protected person. I think people need to be a little bit careful with their kind of wild speculation on an active.
Hong Kong returns to a strict lockdown as the city is currently battling a high number of COVID-19 infections, but the government's zero-infection strategy is frustrating the public. It is possible that hotels in Hong Kong will soon host asymptomatic patients with corona, as the worsening outbreak of the virus in the city means the rapid reduction of the capacity of the hospitals and pandemic containment facilities. Amid concerns over a new virus subvariant, the Japanese government's advisory panel on COVID-19 measures has approved the extension of quasi emergency restrictions currently in place in Tokyo and 12 prefectures. The restrictions are set to expire on Sunday, but now the Japanese government plans to extend them by 3 weeks through March the 6th. Once the extension comes into effect, 36 of the 47 Japanese prefectures will be under virus emergency measures. The State Disaster Relief Agency said that the death toll from cyclone Bitserai in Madagascar jumped to 120 on Friday from 92 reported earlier this week. The cyclone hit the Indian Ocean island late on Saturday, slamming the southeastern coastline before receding late on Sunday. In the United States, the Labor Department said that consumer prices jumped 7.5% last month compared with 12 months earlier. Inflation rose 0.6% in January from a month earlier, ahead of 0.4% expected by economists. This represents a 40-year high after food, electricity and shelter drove in the consumer price index. Nabil Khazini.
In its highest rate since 1992, and in the 4th month in a row, inflation in the United States hit a new record and jumped 7.5%. Analysts say that shortages of supplies and workers and generous federal aid programs during the pandemic, as well as ultra-low interest rates and robust consumer spending, have combined to drive the prices spiral.
It's really affecting, the stuff that I buy daily, like milk, eggs. Now it's like $4, $5 a gallon. Back when I used to get it, well, my parents, when they used to get it, it used to be like $3. Like
expensive, it costs more to do business. So to me, it's a bit of the norm. And I did live through that 40 years ago, right? When inflation was sky high and, mortgage rates were 15%. Just not seeing some of that now.
Inflation rose 0.6% in January from a month earlier, ahead of the 0.4% expected by economists. This represents a 40-year high after food, electricity and shelter drove in the consumer price index.
I feel like it's something that was kind of expected after the pandemic. Otherwise, I don't have too much reaction. Just doesn't affect me and her to a major extent because we're kind of just starting out. So.
President Joe Biden acknowledged the stress inflation is putting on American families. He claims his administration is working to improve the economic situation.
I'm going to work like the devil to bring gas prices down, which I'm going to working to make sure that we keep strengthening the supply chains to bring the cost of energy and everything else and the goods that come to America down.
Inflation has become the main point of concern in the United States. While a little bit of inflation is good for an economy, but too much of it can become deeply damaging, especially if consumers start to expect that prices will continue to rise sharply.
The coup in Myanmar, according to officials, has been a major factor in the sharp increase of drug smuggling in Southeast Asian countries. Laos has witnessed an intense rise in drug seizures. In the provincial capital, Chiang Rai, at least 6.5 million methamphetamine pills have been seized in the last 6 months. The quantity of crystal meth that have been seized, according to authorities, belongs to smugglers from ethnic groups inside Myanmar, where the production of the drug can be a source of money to buy weapons.
I use $1 or $2's worth before I go to work, but other addicts use as much as they have. If they have a bottle, they will use it all.
The Philippines government is welcoming back foreign travelers after 2 years of COVID restrictions. This decision is good news for the many Filipinos who rely on tourism industry and for a country that is also recovering from an earthquake and a super typhoon.
The Philippines has reopened its doors to travelers from more than 150 countries with visa-free privileges, lifting entry restrictions for foreign tourists and business people after nearly 2 years. It's a move to revive the battered tourism industry as the latest coronavirus outbreak started to ease. Foreign travelers will no longer be required to quarantine in government-designated centers upon arrival if they've been fully vaccinated and tested negative prior to arrival. The government had initially planned to lift the ban on December 1st, but indefinitely postponed it as the more contagious Omicron variant spread, which also prompted authorities to reimpose tighter restrictions.
It was like you were happy the other day, and the next day you were sad, because you might not have a job the next day. How could I pay my expenses? So, when we started operating again, even though we have only 2 customers, it felt like we were already back.
President Rodrigo Duterte warned that unvaccinated Filipinos who defy orders to stay at home could face arrest. Commuters who have not been immunized were also prohibited from public transport in the capital region of more than 13 million people, unless on urgent errands, for at least up to the end of the month. The decision has sparked protests by human rights and labor groups.
The impact is so positive because you're talking about the drivers, the porters, the tour operators. We're looking at a great multiplier effect.
According to government statistics, the number of tourists dropped by more than 6 million, and more than 1 million Filipinos lost their jobs in tourism businesses and destinations in the first year of the pandemic alone. Tourism destinations, including popular beach and island resorts, resembled ghost towns at the height of the pandemic lockdowns.
More than 40,000 migrants from Venezuela have unexpectedly lost their Colombian citizenship cards without even being told. Miriam Sian.
The National Registry of Colombia has cancelled 43,000 identification cards for migrant children of Colombians who have been nationalized since 2014. In recent days, cases of Colombian Venezuelans denouncing the cancellation of their citizenship card in Colombia arbitrarily and because they were born in Venezuela were revealed. According to statements collected by RCN Radio, a citizen explained that her identity was taken away arbitrarily.
I went to the closest registry office to my home to ask, and they told me that they had taken all Colombo Venezuelans and concealed their identifiers without informing them.
Our right to my identity has been violated. Yes, I was born in Venezuela, but already have a life here, a credit history, everything. Now I live in fear, feeling that I am some sort of criminal.
Although citizens' complaints claim that the cancellation of the document had no explanation, the director of the Civil Registry of National Registry, Rodrigo Perez, pointed out that the said process was carried out after the examination of more than 40,000 documents. The examined documents were not compiled with the requirements established by the law, and due to the non-compliance, the persons concerned must initiate a new process in order for the documents to be legally issued, according to Rodrigo Perez.
Dozens of protesters hit main roads in Accra on Thursday to vent their discontentment against the projected electronic transaction levy that the Nana Akufo-Addo government wants to implement, Sit Islam reports.
Due to new tax on electronic transactions the Nana Akufo-Addo government wants to imply, many Ghanaian citizens took the streets of Accra to express their dissatisfaction with the new levy in different ways. The protests also objected rising fuel prices, high cost of living and corruption in the country. Accra protests displayed different types of images, where all tweets of the Akufo-Addo and his vice were turned into signs. Coalition followers, foremost the Antia protest, have stated they will not pay the increased tax, even if the 2022 budget is finally approved by Parliament. Since the government yesterday revealed plans to implement the contentious 1.75% e-levy on electronic transfers, bank transfers, merchant payments, and inward settlements has received fierce reproach. Although President Nana Akufo-Addo has stated that the tax will assist create more employment for Ghana's youth, members of the opposition National Democratic Congress and the Coalition of Concerned Ghanaians have spoken out against it.
The koala has been formally considered as endangered by the Australian government due to a drop in its numbers as a result of land clearing and catastrophic bushfires that have reduced its habitats. Sofiane Kenturi reports.
Susan Ley, the Environment Minister, accepted the Vulnerable Species Scientific Committee's proposal that the conservation status of koala's population in Queensland, New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory be improved. The tougher national law listing acknowledges that the koala's position has become more urgent and that successive Australian governments have failed to improve the koala situation since it was categorized as vulnerable in 2012.
Thank you.
It comes after the Morrison government pledges $15 million to rescue the species last month. Environment groups applauded the investment, but it was described as a drop in the ocean if the underlying causes of the species decline were not addressed.
Today, I'm increasing the protection for koalas in New South Wales, the ACT and Queensland, listing them as endangered rather than their previous designation of vulnerable.
In addition to endangered status, Ley stated that the government intends to implement a long-awaited national recovery strategy for the koala.
And now it's time to have a reminder of our main top stories. President Joe Biden repeated his call for his citizens to leave Ukraine immediately and reiterated that under no circumstances would he send troops to the field in Ukraine, even to evacuate Americans in the event of a Russian invasion of the country. The foreign ministers of the United States, Australia, Japan and India began discussions today, Friday, on deepening the so-called Quad alliance, which aims to contain the expansion of the Chinese influence in the Asia-Pacific region. Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva tested positive late last year for a heart medication. And Libya's parliament appointed on Thursday former Interior Minister Fethi Bashagha to replace Abdelhamid Beba as head of government in a controversial vote. That's all for me and the rest of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.